about actual evangelism in church growth. I noticed evangelism, that scary word, got dropped in the program. So I'm going to scare you a little bit because we are going to talk about that, but don't get too scared. First of all, I want to tell you that I am with the research office in the denominational offices in Louisville, and we are your research office. We do research for congregations, Presbytery synods, seminaries, and General Assembly level agencies, among others. So if there's ever something that you want to know about the Presbyterian Church, some facts or statistics, or you need some help looking at your own congregation, that's what we're there to do, is to help you look at yourselves and find out the answers to the questions that you have. One of the handouts that you're going to get looks like this. It's called Tools for Congregations, and that tells you about the services that we offer directly for congregations, and all of that information is available on our website. So that's the first thing that you get to take away from here. I also want to tell you up front that I am a nerdy researcher. I have to be honest up front about that. So there are going to be some statistics here, but it's not scary. You'll get through it. It's all right. But if anybody is interested in really seeing all of the numbers in detail later on, I'm more than willing to share the PowerPoint with anybody who wants to have it. Don't feel like you have to scribble down every number that I speak today. So pay attention to what we're talking about, and if you want the PowerPoint later, I'd be glad to share it with you. So we're going to talk about myths and facts about evangelism and church growth. Everybody has an idea about some things, about what affects church growth, what evangelism is all about, but a lot of those are just ideas or theories that people have or stories that have been told. We're the research office, so we've got data about what's really going on related to evangelism and church growth. So we're going to get the facts today. So this is actually part of the PCUSA's effort to grow Christ Church deep and wide. And one of the elements of that effort is in evangelism. And it says that we will share the good news of Jesus Christ, invite persons to join in the church's worship and fellowship, and baptize children and adults. And so I hope that when I'm done today that you will feel just a little bit more empowered and equipped to do these sorts of things in your own congregations. When we look at congregational life, we come from a focus on strengths. Too often congregations beat themselves up about what they already know are their challenges and their difficulties and struggles that they have. Instead, we encourage congregations to identify what their strengths are and to use those strengths to become stronger instead of focusing on weaknesses. It's an appreciative inquiry approach that says that every congregation has a strength that they can affirm and build on for the future. So that comes to the first obvious question is, well, what is a strong congregation? There are lots of typologies. People have different taxonomies of what strong congregations, but here are some of the common issues that people say are parts of strong congregations. Strong congregations provide a sense of community. Like the Cheers bar, they're places where people know your name, where you can connect with other people. Strong congregations seek to educate worshipers about the faith, and that includes both people who are already in the church and need to strengthen and build their faith, as well as people who are new to the faith and need to know what it's about to be a Christian, what it's about to be a Presbyterian. Strong congregations share their faith with others. There's the evangelism and outreach effort that we're going to talk about today. Strong congregations also serve others. They take care of the needs of the people who are in their pews and also work to make the community where they are located a better place to be. They serve the needs of others. And finally, perhaps most importantly, congregations convey the sense that life has meaning. There used to be a church sign going north out of Louisville into Indiana, and it said, "You have an expiration date." Congregations help people deal with that ultimate fact about life. So some of the other approaches that people have had to evangelism and church growth are what we call trump card approaches. If you've ever played cards, you know that there's one suit that is often the trump card, and if you get cards from that suit, you're more likely to win the game. So people often tell us various things about church growth and evangelism, and they think it's a single ticket, that if you get this winning card, that's all you need, and your church will be a growing, successful church. And we reject most of those trump card approaches. Here's some of the ones that people often talk about: congregational size. If our congregation could just get to 100 or 150, then we'd be a great, successful church. Or worship style. If we could just have that perfect blend of traditional and contemporary music in our services, people would flock to our doors. It's not just the music. Leadership. Well, if we could just call that perfect pastor that young, male, good-looking pastor with the wife who works endlessly in church committees, and two perfect kids who sit quietly in the back and participate in youth activities, and probably a dog, that our church congregation will grow and be successful. It's not just the pastor. Congregational mission. Many times congregations spend a lot of time crafting a very finely worded mission statement for the congregation. But too often, that's where they stop, and they don't do the mission. So just having a wonderful mission statement will not make your congregation a success. The minimum factor. Some of you might be familiar with natural church development, and they look at multiple issues for congregations, and they identify the one where the score is lowest, focus on fixing that, and then go to the next one and start fixing that. But it's a very negative approach because they're always focusing on what's wrong with the congregation instead of what's going right. And then context is another element that people often focus on. If our church were just out in the suburbs where all those young families are having kids and raising kids, then we'd be successful. It's not just where you're located that makes your church successful. Instead, we take a multifaceted approach and say that congregations have strengths. All congregations have strengths. God put your church where it's located, brought the people to your doors for a reason, and that's the reason that you have, and those are the strengths that you have. But we also believe that congregations require multiple strengths to be effective in today's rapidly changing and complex society. It's not sufficient just to have one strength, but really you need a variety of strengths to be able to build on. So how do we identify strengths? Nerdy researchers, we do a survey. We do a data-based approach and use what we term the U.S. Congregational Life Survey. The U.S. Congregational Life Survey is the largest survey that has ever been conducted of worshipers in the United States. Over 500,000 worshipers in 5,000 congregations took part, and your research office carried this out. Next slide. We had congregations from all 50 states take part. We had congregations of all sizes, from small ones where there were maybe 20 people worshiping on a Sunday, to large churches that have thousands of people showing up on multiple services on the weekend. And we had congregations from over 50 denominations take part. We had a true random sample of congregations in this country take part in the survey. So it includes everybody from Catholics to Baptists, Jewish synagogues, Buddhist temples, Presbyterians, Methodists, you name it. Everybody's in this survey. And so the results that we have represent the entirety of religious life in America today. But in that random sample, there are not enough Presbyterian churches for us really to say too much about what's going on in our pews. So we also had a random sample of 523 Presbyterian churches take part in that survey. But we were also interested in what's going on in churches that are fast growing. So in addition to those other samples, we invited the fastest growing churches in this denomination to take part in the same survey. What we did is we looked at change in average worship attendance over the 5-year period. And we ranked churches from top to the bottom, and we invited the fastest growing ones, and 93 took part. Now we scrubbed those records pretty good based on worship attendance that people report on their session annual statistical report, so that we knew these really were growing churches. If a church reported 50 in attendance, 50 in attendance, 50 in attendance, 50 in attendance, 500 in attendance, we thought there might just have been a little clerical error, so we didn't take those kind of churches. We were pretty sure that these were really fast-growing churches. Not that any of you would ever make mistakes on your session annual statistical reports. Next. So what's unique about the Congregational Life Survey? Well, first of all, there's a focus on worshipers. There have been many, many surveys that have included more congregations than we looked at, but they typically rely on the input of just one person in each congregation, typically the pastor, the priest, or the rabbi. Now those people have lots to tell us about what's going on in congregational life, but maybe, like me, you've been occasionally in a church where the views of the pastor didn't quite coincide with what the people in the pews were thinking. It happens occasionally. We focused on what people sitting in the pews were thinking about their congregation. The survey was given in worship, so everybody who came on the day the survey was given filled out a survey. So it's a great opportunity to see what worshipers as a group are saying about their congregation. We also focus on more than just numerical growth. We don't see that that's the be-all and end-all of measurement of church health. We looked at multiple strengths. So we identified 10 different strengths and looked across those to see what's going on in congregations. And typically congregations have 2 or 3 strengths. A really exciting, vibrant church might have more than that. But we found almost no churches that have all 10 of those strengths. Everybody has sort of a unique snowflake footprint of what their church looks like. And then we also focused on developing resources for congregations. The survey was generously funded by the Lilly Endowment. They're the largest funder of religious research in the U.S. And as researchers, we'd be happy to sit in our office and analyze the data for the rest of our careers. We've got that much data. But it was important to Lilly, and it's important to us as part of this denomination to give back to every congregation that took the survey. So congregations get back a series of reports and tools to help them look at what their worshipers said. They get tools that show their worshipers' responses in comparison to the national average, what that random sample said. And so that's a quick way where congregations can see where they're above average, where they have strengths. We also give every congregation a leader guide so that they can look at those reports and see how they can use them to become stronger in mission and ministry. We give them DVDs to get through those reports because not everybody can handle statistics. They're fairly basic, but we do give them the videos and the leader guides to help them with that. Did that one. This brochure that you've all got tells you how any congregation now can take the survey and learn more about who your worshipers are, what they value in your congregation, and what the strengths of your church are. Because all the development costs were covered by the Lilly Grant, it's very cost effective to do. Because it's done in worship, you don't have to worry about the cost and hassle of mailing out surveys and trying to harass people to send them back to you. You do the survey in worship, ship the results back to us, and we'll give you the same resources that all congregations that have participated in the past get. We've heard from congregations that it's very, very helpful when they're looking for a new pastor, when they're trying to develop a new long-term plan, or perhaps when a new pastor has just come on board and wants to see what's going on in the congregation. And then, as was mentioned earlier, we produced some books about the results of the survey. This is the latest one. The congregational survey was first done in 2001, and then we replicated it in 2008 and 2009. So this brings up-to-date information about who worships in America. Field guide to U.S. congregations, who's going where and why. This one looks at the 10 strengths, beyond the ordinary 10 strengths of U.S. congregations. And then the third one is places of promise, that looks at how congregations can interact with and embrace the communities where they're located. And you've got a white handout sheet that gives you the details about all of those. And every congregation that does the survey gets these resources as well. And that's the end of the shameless commerce section of the presentation. Let's get to this. Yes. But the data suggests the opposite direction. That's what I love about Bob. Evidence doesn't discourage him. We worked with a cartoonist who's actually from Australia. The Australians did a congregational life survey and helped us do the first one here in the U.S. And this is an Australian cartoonist, and his stuff applies to the U.S. just 100%. So we've commissioned a series of cartoons from him, and they're sprinkled through the book. So if you don't get anything else out of the book, you get great cartoons. All right, we're going to start with the green handout that has each of the myths and facts that we're going to go through. And it's a little pop quiz here this morning. Let's see if anybody can get them all right. Number one, only congregations in rapidly growing areas are adding members. False. Wow, this is a good group. Well, what did we do to determine that? We use a technique called multiple regression that you don't have to worry about. Think of it as a big soup pot. We put into that soup pot all the things that we thought might predict growth. Turned up the heat to see what bubbles to the top to see as really important factors in predicting congregational growth. So what did we put into our soup pot? Well, first of all, we looked at, is the area growing? Change in population in the zip code where the church is located. But we know there's lots of other things that people think predicts church growth, so we put those things in too. We put in the size of the church, because some people believe it's just those big churches that keep getting bigger. Is that true? We put that into the soup pot. We also put in faith group. Was the church a Catholic church? Was it a mainline church like Presbyterians and Methodists and Lutherans? Or was it a conservative Protestant or evangelical church like the Baptist, the Church of the Nazarene, and so on? So we put that in the soup pot, because some of us think that it's only the conservative Protestants that are growing churches. We'll find out. Then, as I said, we identified 10 strengths of congregations, and those are things like providing meaningful worship, helping people grow spiritually, focusing on the community, and those sorts of things. We put those in the soup pot, because we thought those are the core characteristics of congregations that might make a difference in terms of whether a church grows or not. We also put in the soup pot the average age of congregations, because some people believe if you have lots of older worshipers, you can't be a successful growing church. We put that in there. And then the last thing we put in is the average income of worshipers. And this is not based on what the pastor thinks might be the income, but it's what people told us on the congregational survey, what their income was. So we put all of those things into the soup pot, and we tried to determine how much those things predicted church growth. And we measured that by change in average worship attendance over a 5-year period. We didn't look at membership because some denominations don't keep track of members. Excuse me. And in some denominations, membership is really counted in very different ways than other denominations. So average worship attendance is something that pretty much all congregations keep statistics on and can report that. So we turned the heat up, and what did we find as the best predictors of church growth? There were 3 things, and these are 3 of the strengths. There were only 3 things from all of those things that I mentioned that predicted strengths. So the congregations that are doing better in these 3 areas are more likely to be growing churches. The first is congregations that are doing a good job of caring for children and youth. So they've got strong programs for youth, parents are satisfied with those, and children who are still living at home, even though they're 18 or 20, tend to be attending church with their parents, so there's a retention of children. Where churches have really good, strong programs for children, more likely to be growing churches. Number 2, welcoming new people. Congregations that actively and honestly welcome people in their doors when they come as new people are more likely to be growing churches. And finally, participating in the congregation. Congregations where lots of people participate in lots of ways in the church are more likely to be growing churches. Churches where people come on Sunday and never come back during the week, not likely to be going to church. These kind of churches have lots of people involved in small groups, Sunday school classes, Bible studies, prayer groups, fellowship groups. They have lots of people taking on leadership roles in the congregation, singing in the choir, serving as a church school teacher, leading another group. People are actively involved in decision-making in the churches. So congregations where lots of people are involved are more likely to be growing churches. And those are the only things that we found predict church growth. So there's your blueprint for the future. But, and this is the most complicated thing, so if you don't get this, it's downhill from here. We found 3 things that were actually negative predictors. So congregations that were on the extreme, on these 3 strengths, were less likely to be growing. And now it sounds kind of counterintuitive, hard to figure this out. Congregations that are strong in the strength of growing spiritually. They're doing a great job of helping their worshipers grow spiritually and grow in discipleship. But they're typically, if they're on the extreme on this, they're so inwardly focused, they can be off-putting to someone else. So they're very focused on meeting the needs of the worshipers who are already in their pews. And if someone comes in and doesn't have those exact same needs, it's not going to fit for them, so they don't continue to attend. Congregations that are extremely focused on helping the community to be a better place are also less likely to be growing. And what we think is going on here is that these churches are out doing mission 2 or ministry 4. They're not doing it as an interactive thing. They're not encouraging people to come into the congregation. So they're really almost more of a social service agency than a church. So if you're extremely high on focus on the community, less likely to be a growing church. And then the last one is sharing faith. The most important measure that goes into sharing faith is the number of worshipers who invited somebody in the last year to their church. You might think that that would be a great indicator of growth, a great factor that would predict growth. But if your people are inviting lots and lots of people, but they walk in the doors and don't find anything that's meaningful to them there, that God is not present there, that the people don't welcome them, those invitations are useless. So if you're doing lots of invitations, but you don't have what it takes to back it up, less likely to be a growing church. Next. So all these other things we looked at were not significant predictors. So what this tells us is those other strengths, not so important. The size of the congregation, small churches and large churches can both be growing congregations. The average age of worshipers, even if you have lots of older people in your pews, you can still be a growing congregation. Average income is irrelevant. You don't have to have wealthy worshipers who can fund a beautiful building and extensive programs. Any congregation can be growing. Faith group did not make a difference. So Catholic churches, mainline Protestant churches, and conservative Protestant churches can all be growing churches. And finally, population growth. It didn't matter if you were located in a growing community or in a community that might be losing people. Congregations can be successful anywhere. One of my colleagues, Cynthia Willover, who's the co-author on the book, she says that congregations can grow anywhere and congregations can be killed anywhere too. a negative look. Ah, thank you. Okay, only new or recently established congregations are growing. Okay, this is another look at the same issue, but this is looking at Presbyterian churches now. Of the PCUSA fast-growing churches in that sample, 37% were established before 1900. Those are very old churches, and yet they were growing today. Another 70% were established between 1900 and 1959. So our own Presbyterian churches that are very old can still be successful growing churches, and that's good news for everyone. Only large churches grow. Okay, we looked at that for the whole random sample a minute ago. What happens in Presbyterian churches? Is it only our large churches that are growing? No, of course not. 39% of our fastest growing churches have fewer than 200 in worship. So there are lots of very small churches that are managing to increase in size. Another 40% have fewer than 300 in worship. Okay, so lots of small and large churches can be successful. Most people have been attending their congregation for years and years. When you look out at the pews, doesn't it sometimes look like that? You know, Mary's always been sitting there, Tom and Maybell there, and so on and so forth. It seems like congregations are very, very stable. There's not a lot of change going on. But what we actually find is that's not true. We looked at what we call new people. And new people are people who have been coming to their church for 5 years or less. 5 years or less they've been attending there. It's not just visitors, because visitors might come once or twice and never come back again. So that's really not an effective measure. The people who come and continue to come for 5 years, they're connecting with that church, and they're the people that we need to look at. And it's also not what we'll call, for lack of a better term, the old-timers. The people who've been there 6 years, or 16 years, or 46 years, or whatever. Okay, how do new people play out in congregations? Okay, here's the details. One more. Ah, this got a little messed up. That 50% goes up above the random sample. In the random sample of congregations, 50... No, it doesn't go up there. Okay, in the random sample, it's 1/3. In the random sample, 1/3 of people... Yeah, it's just not there. Sorry. 1/3 of people are new in the last 5 years in the random sample of congregations. And actually, this kind of surprised us. This indicates that in most congregations, there are new people coming in there with new ideas, and exciting things can happen when there are new people coming in. In the PCUSA random sample, this is the true random sample of Presbyterian churches, it's about 1/3 as well. So we look about the same. But in the fast-growing churches there on the bottom, that's where the 50% is. 50% of people in the fast-growing churches are new in the last 5 years. Think of what that means in a congregation. If you've got a 5-year plan, half the people don't have a clue what that's about. So the pace of change is much more rapid when you have lots of new people coming into congregations. But even when you've only got 1/3 of people who are new, you still do have some new energy and new ideas for the future of the congregation. Most new people are new to the faith. I think, again, those conservative Protestants, the evangelicals, spread this view that they're bringing new people to Christ, they're saving souls. That's where they're getting all the new people into their pews and into their megachurches. Is that true? No. There's actually 4 different types of new people. And again, we're looking at people that came to their congregation in the last 5 years. The first type are the true first-timers. They've never been in church before. This is the first time they've been in a religious community. The second category are returnees, people who maybe attended church when they were a child or as they were growing up and then drifted away. Now they're coming back, maybe because they've become married, they're having children, they've seen something missing in their life, so they're returning to congregational life. The third type are switchers, people who came to your congregation from a church of a different denomination. So it might be a Methodist coming to a Presbyterian church, or it might be a Southern Baptist going to a church of the Nazarene, or it might be a Unitarian going to a Catholic church. I don't think that one happens. And then the last kind are transfers, people who have simply changed churches within the same denomination. If I'm attending Second Presbyterian in Louisville and move here to Ellsworth and I come to First Presbyterian, I have simply transferred my membership. So how does that break out in congregations? This is a picture both for for Presbyterian churches and for fast-growing churches. There wasn't really much difference there. Only 8% of new people in our pews are actually new to the faith. What this says is that even today, America is still a very church society. Most people do have some religious background that they can bring to their church when they come to your congregation. I think this is going to be changing. We did see the percentage of first-timers go down a little bit from 2001 to 2008, and I think in the future, to go up a little bit. I think it will continue to go up in the future. There will be more people who were not raised in the church that don't have that background. 23% of people who are new in our pews are returnees. So right before they came to your congregation, they weren't going anywhere, but at some time in the past they did. So I think this is actually good news, that we are doing pretty good about bringing people back into the pews. 40% in Presbyterian congregations are switchers, coming from Methodist or Baptist or UCC churches. And then 30% are transfers. So no, congregations are not doing a good job of bringing people to Christ for the very first time. It doesn't look much different in conservative Protestant churches. They're not doing any better than we are in bringing new people in. Where it does look a little bit different is Catholic churches. And there's still that sense that once a Catholic, always a Catholic. There's not as much switching in Catholic churches. So the transfer percentage in Catholic churches is going to be much higher, and the switcher percentage is going to be lower. But in most Protestant churches, this is about what it looks like. New people usually learn about the congregation from advertising. Right? Big church sign. If you're in the South, sometimes it's got lights that blink. That's what brings people in, right? Well, we asked those people a series of the people who are new to their churches in the last 5 years, some specific questions about how they got engaged in that congregation. And let's see what they said. Oh, first the advertising. Now this church knows how to advertise. Coffee, cake, and conversion. So we asked people who are new at the church in the last 5 years, how did you first find out about the congregation? What was your first connection with the church? Only 6% said advertising. And that includes on the web, phone book, newspapers, whatever. Only 6%. Another 9% said that they were looking for their denomination. 23% said pass by, so you might think that's advertising, they saw the sign. But the biggest reason is someone invited me. Next slide. 1/2 of new people in their churches came there because someone invited them. It's that personal connection, the personal invitation that makes all the difference in getting someone in the door for the very first time. It's someone that they trust, who they already know and have a relationship, who invites them to church most often. Don't go out and ditch your advertising budget. Advertising is still important. It goes hand in hand with inviting. Advertising does really 2 important things. First of all, the people who are already in your pews and see that advertising, whether it's a church sign or a story in the newspaper or whatever, they get kind of pumped up. They get kind of excited, right? Matthew, where are you? They get excited. And people who are excited are going to be good evangelists for your church. They're going to issue effective invitations. So they're kind of feeling pumped up that that's my church, and that's a great thing. But the other thing it does is when those people issue invitations, would you like to come to church with me on Sunday? I'm at thus and such church. Oh, I read about your church. You're the ones who have that Turtle Soup Festival in the fall. Or, yeah, I know you just had a new wing put on in the church and you did it all environmentally friendly stuff. That's great. Yeah, I want to go there. So when you issue the invitation, it clicks in their mind. I know that church. I have a positive affect for that church before they ever get in the door. So it really does go hand in hand. I was on a plane going back to Louisville a couple years ago, and somebody came down the aisle. He had like a neon or a royal blue golf shirt on, and over the pocket it said Adventure Christian Church. And he's coming down the aisle, and my mind just kind of takes off. I'm thinking, what do you do with Adventure Christian Church? Hide and seek between services? So he came down there, so I said, that's a great name for the church. That's just really interesting. And he said, oh, it's a new church start. He says, we're in Louisville. Our first service is this Sunday. Why don't you come? He was a walking billboard for his church, and that's why I was invited to go to that church. So the advertising and the invitations really do go hand in hand. We asked a follow-up question, and here, instead of asking for one reason why they first came, we said, asked to give them 2. What were the 2 reasons that you came here for the very first time? And here again, 1/3 of people said, I know somebody who attends here. There's that personal invitation. 32% said that they were actively looking for a church. So it helps if they are open to church life and not having that totally closed out of their life. 26% said it's easy to get to. So if you invite me to your church and it's way across town or out in the cornfields or something that's too far to go to, it's not going to be likely that they're going to show up. But there's an exception there, and that's what's typically called niche churches. So if you have a specific ministry or a specific program, people are willing to drive farther for those special things, particularly if you have worship in a specific language. Someone who's in the community and wants to worship in their native language will drive a farther distance to get to church than people who don't have those kinds of needs. 18% said they'd like people they'd met, so they already knew something about people who attend there and had a good feel for them. And 11% said they heard about sermons and other activities in the church. So it really is the whole picture that draws people to the congregation, but the personal invitation is what is key. We also asked a follow-up question about how many churches they visited before coming to this church. So this is in addition to visiting this church, how many did you visit when you were looking around? We tend to think that people are doing a lot of church shopping these days, and that's just not true. 29% said that they didn't visit any other churches. I came here, I felt comfortable the first time, and I've continued attending. Another 50% said they just visited one or two. So you put those two together, and 8 in 10 new people haven't really done much church shopping. Now there's people over at the extreme who are going to 5 or more. Those are maybe the eternal church shoppers, and you see those types who just go from one to another and they're never satisfied. Okay, so let's follow up on that. We know the invitation is the most important thing. Who are the people who are issuing invitations? We had that question on the survey. Have you invited even one person to your church in the past year? Less than half said they did. Less than half of worshipers invited even one person to worship over the last year. So we've got lots of room to grow. But who are the people who did issue invitations? Well, they're the people with these kinds of characteristics. They feel that the worship in the congregation helps them with life, so they're getting something out of the services every week. They feel inspiration and joy in worship. They feel their spiritual needs are being met in the congregation. They feel they belong there, they're connecting, they have a sense of purpose of being in that church. They participate in small groups there. Didn't we hear that participating in the church was one of the things that went hand in hand with growing churches? It's a two-way street. People where lots of people are participating in the church are more likely to be growing churches because those people invite other people to find out what the good things are that they're experiencing there. And people who hold leadership roles, your elders, your deacons, people who are church school teachers and so on, they're more likely to be issuing invitations. So what this says is it's a whole big picture. It's the people who are excited about what's going on there. They are thrilled with what they're getting and what they're experiencing in their church, and they want to share that with other people. So if you can't pass on a sense of excitement to people who are sitting in your pews now, it's unlikely they're going to go out and issue an invitation to somebody else. We also looked at some demographic characteristics. As Matthew mentioned, people who began attending in the last 5 years are more likely to issue invitations. They're still excited about what they found in there and what drew them into the congregation. So they're going to talk about that to other people. They're excited about it. The challenge is all those other people who've been there 6 and 16 and 36 years, how can you make sure that they're still excited about what's going on in your congregation so that they can invite other people? We also found that female worshipers are more likely to issue invitations to other people than men. Now, we found over and over in congregations across the U.S. that about 60% of worshipers are women. Doesn't matter what type of congregation, big or small, it's about 60% are women. So women are more likely issuing invitations, so it's going to be to other women oftentimes. So it becomes a perpetuating thing if we can't find some way to encourage more men to be involved in our congregations, to know that that's a place where they can be at home as well, and to encourage them to invite other people to worship. Someone once told me the best time to reach all those men in the pews to make sure that they're there and they hear about any new programs for men is when? Guesses?
Super Bowl Sunday.
They're not in church at Super Bowl Sunday, we know that. People often say Father's Day, but it's Mother's Day. Because they're going to go there with their mother, they're going to go with their wife and mother of their kids. That's the day that they're going to be in church, if any day, other than Sunday, Easter and Christmas, and that's not a really good time to do it. It's not a bad time to do outreach, but it's not the best time. But on Mother's Day, more of the men are going to show up that day, so that's the time to pitch exciting new programs to the men in the church. Can I go back one? Thanks. The other thing is people between the ages of 65 are more likely to issue invitations. People over age 65 often have all of their friends already in the church. They don't have as many connections with the outside world, so sometimes it's hard for them to find people that they can invite to their congregation. But those under the age of 25 would be great evangelists, because those are the kinds of people you want to encourage to be in your pews, are younger people. So how can you empower those young people to be effective evangelists? It's probably not by saying they can't talk about their faith story from the pulpit. Encourage them to play a part in the congregation, including evangelism for the church. Reverse evangelism was discovered by Reverend Drake. Using strategies employed by nightclubs, he discovered that to attract young people, the church had to be very difficult. Okay, I don't think we want to really put up barriers to children. Denomination is irrelevant to church seekers. We hear that over and over. The denomination is irrelevant. People just go where the programs are the best, where they have things that are available for their children, where the services are at a convenient time, and I don't care what the denomination is. What did people actually tell us? We asked new people again, who came within the last 5 years, how important is the denomination of this congregation? Next one. And 54, more than half of worshipers in Presbyterian pews said it was either very important or important. And that really didn't change very much from 2001. We thought it would be less important today. But about half of worshipers in our pews say that denomination is still important to them. However, next slide. It didn't change much from 2001 to 2008, as you can see. Next slide. But it does matter based on faith group and age. So you can see Catholics, as we said, Catholics tend to stay Catholic. So they're looking for another Catholic church when they're looking for another place to worship. Mainline Protestants, a little less so, and conservative Protestants, even less. So conservative Protestants really are just willing to go wherever they have their needs met, regardless of what the sign is on the building. But those last two slides don't show up very well. The first slide is the age, I think it's 45 and above. 25 and above, 55% of those worshipers said that it's very important to the denomination. But those under the age of 25, only 42% said the denomination is important. So as those young people grow up, it may be that we have a harder time keeping people in Presbyterian pews. They may be more willing to go elsewhere to meet their spiritual needs. New people usually come back after the first time because of the coffee hour, right? You gotta have the name brand Starbucks coffee and name brand donuts instead of the store-bought coffee and the day-old cookies. We asked new people, what impressed you the most and made you want to come back after the very first time you were here? 55% said it was the friendliness of the people. So when they came in the doors and someone met them and they sat in the congregation during worship, people were friendly to them. They didn't say, you're sitting in my seat, or give them that look that people give. They really were friendly to them. 34% said it was the quality of the sermon. So it's what they're hearing from the pulpit as well is very important in making sure that they come back the next time. 30% said it was the overall worship experience, and other people said it was the style of the pastor and the music during worship. So pastors cannot blame laity. It's not just laity. And laity cannot say it's just what the pastor's saying that brings people back. They go hand in hand. It's the entire experience of what goes on in worship. Question?
What does the style of the pastor mean?
Well, some pastors are, kind of like this and preaching. Others of them are like this. That was actually the... Well, it's probably more than just preaching style, I would say. It really is sort of their whole demeanor. Are they kind of casual and relaxed, or are they more formal? That kind of thing. So it really is the whole package that what brings people back the second time after they've come to visit for the first time. I'll tell you about a congregation that I went to in Louisville when I first moved there, Presbyterian Church, that will remain nameless. And I walked in, and the two ushers with the bulletins were in a conversation, and somebody handed me a bulletin. I said, okay, I can find my way in. Went one step farther in, and somebody came at me from the other side and said, we're having a blood drive after worship today. Would you like to give blood? So the ushers couldn't even say hello to me, and then they're asking me for my blood? It's just a very strange experience. So I sat through the service, and it was the morning service, early service, so it wasn't a huge group. There was no way people could not know that I was a visitor there, and nobody spoke to me. Nobody spoke to me, except during passing the peace, and that's just sort of pro forma. But I figured, well, I'm going to fill out the pew pad that says I'm new, and see what happens. They didn't follow up. They did absolutely nothing. I mean, they did everything wrong in that church. And that's a very well-respected church in Louisville. So, I mean, there really have to be a lot of planning and a lot of consideration about what happens when people come to your congregations for the very first time, so that the whole package is a good experience for them. So we asked that follow-up question. Well, what did the congregation do the very first time you visited? How did they follow up with you? 24% said no follow-up whatsoever. 24% said no follow-up. And there were actually 20% who said, I don't know, which probably means there was no follow-up. So lots of congregations just really aren't maximizing the potential to connect with people after they've been there for the first time. 20% said the pastor sent a letter, 18% said a member called me, 13% said the pastor called, 11% said they sent some materials. So there's lots of ways that you can connect with worshipers after they've been there for the very first time. But please do something. Maybe not this extreme. Yes, they are very welcome. Growing churches rely exclusively on big church signs and big advertising campaigns. That's how congregations can be successful. Well, here we're going to flip the side, and we're not going to see here what worshipers are saying, but this is what congregations are saying. So every congregation that participated in the survey, in addition to giving a survey to everybody in worship, they filled out what we call the congregational profile, and had lots of facts and figures about the congregation, how many worship services, what they do in worship, what they're doing in terms of outreach advertising. So are the growing churches really the ones that are doing all the advertising? The first column there shows the things that the random sample, or excuse me, the fast-growing churches, fast-growing Presbyterian churches are doing. And the other one is a random sample of churches. And those that are highlighted in blue are where there's at least a 10% difference, so we know that there's really something important going on there. And you can see that almost all of the fast-growing Presbyterian churches said that they're sending materials out to their visitors after the first time. Only 81% of the other churches are doing that. Pretty much all the churches say that they're encouraging and inviting. Well, actually, I don't know about that 12% that say that they don't even encourage their worshipers to invite people. How would they admit that on a survey? 85% of growing churches said that they use email. Now I want to point out here that the growing church sample was done in 2002, and the random sample here is from 2008 and 2009. So we're right now redoing that fast-growing church sample, and if anybody here is doing that survey this fall for us, we thank you for doing that. So we'll be able to update these figures in the future, but I suspect that 85% is much higher in 2011. Fast-growing churches are more likely to say that they let other groups use their facilities. Might be an AA group that's meeting there, some other English as a second language program, a church school, a nesting congregation. Their doors are open, so there's people who are coming into their church on a regular basis for other purposes. Fast-growing churches are more likely to use a paid ad in the newspaper. It's only 60% in the random sample of Presbyterian churches, but that actually has gone down. I'm not surprised because newspapers are sort of losing their market penetration in society today, and this will be less important in the future, I believe. And here are some other things that they're doing to attract new people. Fast-growing churches are much more likely to say that they pick up the telephone and call those people who visited the first time. Okay, only 4 in 10 of the random sample of churches do that, and 7 in 10 of the fast-growing churches do. Church websites, again, we've got that difference in time frame, so I suspect when we find the new statistics, it's going to be almost 100% of churches have websites now. Growing churches more likely to have an ad in the phone book and to actually visit visitors, to actually take that step to go out to their homes and welcome them after the service. So what this tells us is that the fast-growing churches are really exploiting all possible opportunities to connect with people who visit the pews for the first time. They're not relying just on one mechanism to bring people into the church and connect with them. They're using lots and lots of different strategies. So I want to talk a little bit about hospitality. Hospitality in the congregation really is not different from hospitality anywhere else, including in your homes. When people come to visit your church, your home, you wouldn't just hand them the bulletin and let them walk in the door. You're going to welcome them warmly and make sure that they know that this is a place where they can be comfortable. So the first thing to look at is visibility in the community. Can people find your church? They've made a decision they're going to come to your church because somebody invited you, but can they actually find the congregation? It's surprising how many churches don't have adequate signage. The people think, oh, everybody knows where First Presbyterian is. Well, no, everybody does not know where First Presbyterian is, even in a town the size of Ellsworth. So make sure that there is adequate signage so that when people are trying to get there, they can get there. The second is promotional materials. It's important to make sure that everything that goes out from your congregation has badging that says it's from your congregation, including where your church is, what the phone number is, and when the worship services are. Because if not, if I pass this bulletin on to my next door neighbor, it doesn't do her any good. She's not going to show up because she doesn't know what the church is. If you're a women's group, for example, puts out a recipe book in the fall. If it doesn't say First Presbyterian Church, come worship with us at 11 on Sundays, then I pass it across the back fence to my neighbor who's got a bumper crop of zucchini. Hey, there's some great zucchini recipes in here. You've lost an opportunity to do some advertising for your church. So make sure everything that goes out from your church is badged with your information. The welcome on the telephone is really important, whether you have an answering machine when nobody's there or whoever is actually answering the phone. So you don't pick up the phone and hear, First Pres, this is Deborah. You know, that's not very warm. Hi, this is First Presbyterian. We're here, whatever your mission statement is. What can I do for you today? You know, a very friendly voice. If you've got a voice message machine on after hours, make sure that that includes your location, your worship service times, and if you need to, some information about how to find the church. Parking and building entrance. When they finally get to your church, can they figure out which door to go in? Is there adequate parking for them? Particularly if you have two different worship spaces and they go in different doors, people don't want to walk in and feel like they're in the wrong place. If you've ever had the experience of going to a party alone and you don't know anyone there, going to church the first time, it's sort of like that. You don't want to walk into a place where everybody else knows what's going on and you don't. You feel really out of place. So make sure people know which door to go in, what to do when they get there. Building accessibility. And this is a very old facility, but there is an elevator. If you don't have new people coming into your congregation, is it simply because they can't get in the door? The days of ADA are here, and we need to make sure that people can get to our sanctuaries and our worship spaces. Greeters and ushers. I already told you the story about my wonderful experience with an usher. It's important that people who are greeting people are people. They're not off-putting. My dad, bless his heart, as they say in the South, is an engineer, and he's all about efficiency. Now, I don't think he ever was an usher in church, thank goodness, because he'd be all about getting people into the pews, and he'd probably just, put you in slots like that and get you all in there. And it would be very efficient, but not very warm and welcoming. So you need to get, the people who are out there who really can connect with the people, who can look them in the eye and tell them what they need to know about the church, who have the answers to questions that people will ask when they come for the first time. Where do I take my child? Where's the bathroom? Those kinds of things. Make sure that those people truly are friendly and can take care of the needs that people are coming to visit your congregation. The worship bulletin. If you have people who come into your church who are first-timers, good for you, but are they going to find your worship bulletin totally off-putting? The doxology? What? The Lord's Prayer? I don't know what that is. If I didn't grow up Christian, I have no idea what that's about. So I would encourage you to take your bulletin and find a friend who doesn't attend church anymore and have them go through it and say, I don't understand this word. I don't understand what this is. What do I do here? Those kinds of things, just so you can make sure that your bulletin is very, very accessible to anybody who might come in the doors. And also what's said from the pulpit. Make sure that, when you talk about the doxology or the Lord's Prayer, that you tell people what that's about, or refer to a screen if you're using a screen so people know what's going on. The sermon. Our pastors are very well educated. Very well educated. Most of our worshipers are too. I think 60% of our worshipers have a college degree. But there are lots of people in our pews, or people who might come into your congregations, that don't have a college education. So if a sermon is preached at a level that requires a college education to understand it, then people who come into your pews without that education are going to feel lost. So it's a challenge to people who are standing in the pulpit to be able to communicate so that everybody can get something that they can connect with, something that is relevant to their personal lives, something that they can take away and use during the next week. So that if I visit for the first time and maybe I only have a high school degree, during the week I can think about, oh, the pastor talked about forgiveness. I remember that. Whereas someone with a college education and lots of Bible experience might be able to frame it in terms of a specific Bible passage. So you're each getting something from the sermon that reaches you where you are. So make sure that the message is relevant to everybody who shows up in your doors. Before and after worship. Before is about making sure people are welcome, they can find the bathrooms. I have a friend who tells me when she's looking at a new church, if she can't find the bathroom and find that it's clean, she will never go back. So make sure that they have access to the services they need before the service and know what's going on. But after worship services, almost all congregations these days have a fellowship hour. If you're a first-time visitor and everybody was out the back door to the fellowship hour and you're standing there by yourself, you're going home. You're losing that opportunity to connect with people on a one-on-one basis. So some of those greeters and ushers who are in your congregations, that should be part of their duties to make sure they point out to people before the service, oh, we have a fellowship hour, why don't you stop by and have coffee afterwards? I'll come get you and make sure you get there. So someone is going to take them to them, learn something about them and say, oh, well, I'd like you to meet Susan here. She has high school age kids too. Maybe you have something in common. So you can begin to build those connections so that it is a place where people feel like they belong, they know the people there on a personal basis and so on. So before and after worship is very important. And then prompt follow-up with visitors. We've talked about that a little bit as well. Whether you're sending out materials that tell about other activities of the church, whether you are telephoning people or doing other sorts of follow-up, make sure you do something to follow up with people. We worked with a church in Indianapolis that had, I thought, a really interesting follow-up method. They had the 3rd and 4th graders draw pictures of the church and write underneath, "We're glad you visited." And that's what they put in the mail to people after the service. Now that sent lots and lots of messages. First of all, those kids knew that they had a part in the church, that they were important to the ministry of the congregation, and that those pictures that they drew were from the heart and telling people that we appreciated they visited. The people who received those, they said, oh, this is a church that takes care of kids. Kids are important in this church because they have a role. So it feeds on both ends and builds up that sense that this is a vital congregation where people are involved. And we heard early on that congregations where they're doing an excellent job of focusing on children and youth are more likely to be growing churches. So there again, that congregation was very effective in building in that area. So prompt up follow-up with visitors is also important. All congregations do the same things to integrate new people into the congregation. Okay, so somebody's been attending now, 3, 4, 5 weeks. What do you do to take that next step to help them become part of that congregation? Here again are what the fast-growing churches are doing and what the other congregations are doing. And again, in blue, you see the differences. Fast-growing churches were much more likely to say that they have some sort of a group for new people. Maybe it's an alpha program, if you've heard of that. It's a program for people who are new to the faith, a new member class. Maybe it's a social activity that's specifically for new people. Something to get those people back to the church again and involved with others there. 67% of the fast-growing churches say that they invite new people to take part in a small group. Well, I've seen you in worship a couple Sundays. Would you like to come to Sunday school with me next week? It needs less than such an hour. Or we're having a new Bible study starting out next Wednesday night. Come with me to that. Or we have a women's fellowship group or a book club or whatever. Invite them to other small groups. About 2/3 of congregations issue some sort of an invitation to service. We're doing a Habitat for Humanity build on Saturday. Would you like to come, pick up your hammer and help build a house? Or would you like to come with me before the service next week? We're going to tidy up the sanctuary before service. Make them know that they can contribute there to the congregation as well. Follow-up visits, only about 4 in 10 in each group are doing that. Specific hospitality. Some congregations, and this is actually more common in conservative Protestant churches, have a formal program of hospitality to new people. So what this typically means is that a couple will reach out to another couple that's new in the church, invite them to their home, So that, again, they connect with other people in the church. Or it might be young mothers who have a mom's day out and go for coffee together. So there's specific planned strategies to reach out to the people who are newly confused and show them what the church is all about. And then, next slide, 15% of the random sample of churches admitted they don't do anything to try and integrate new people into their congregations. Well, they're not going to be successful if they don't do anything. It's not something that just happens by chance. You need to do something to take care of that. Hello, Donaldin. This is a question about the main reason I go to church. Yes, that would be you. That's what I thought. Thank you, dear. One of our survey takers. New member integration methods are entirely successful. Okay, so let's say you are doing things to encourage people to connect to the congregation after they've been there for a few days. You've got a strategic plan to reach out to them in terms of hospitality. You're inviting them to service. You're inviting them to participate in the group. How do new people connect to the congregation? This shows new people who've been coming there 5 years or less in comparison to the old-timers coming there longer. And you can see that old-timers are more likely to attend on a weekly basis. They're more likely to say that they're a member of the congregation. They're more likely to participate in small groups, to serve in a leadership role in the church, and to give 5% or more. So in terms of all of these behavioral aspects, old-timers are much more connected to their churches than new people. Now what we don't know is if these new people who've been coming there maybe 2-3 years, if they'll gradually grow into those more participatory aspects of the congregation. I would think that many of them would, but there's a chance that this is just sort of a sea change, that people who are coming to congregations now may never connect as much as people did in the past. We'll have to watch this over time. But the last one down there, private devotions, you can see that new people and old-timers alike are involved in private devotional activities. So they have that basic level of spirituality just like the old-timers do, but they're just not actually connecting to the congregation as much. Worship services in growing churches offer only contemporary music, right? That's what you gotta do. You gotta have a contemporary worship, praise band. That's what makes a church a growing church. No. We asked congregations what type of worship they have in their worship services, and you can see both in growing churches and in the random sample of churches, almost all congregations include traditional music. It's still part of who we are. We have traditional music, and actually when we ask worshipers what they prefer, most worshipers say that traditional music is one of the 2 or 3 types of worship that they like to hear in worship services. So it's not going away yet. But those fast-growing churches are also offering other types of music. Contemporary hymns, praise music, or choruses. So they have more variety in their musical offerings. If you've got more variety, it's more likely that you're going to be able to meet the needs of lots of different people who have different preferences for music and worship. We also asked about a number of other elements, what's happening in worship services, and this just gives you a picture of how worship in fast-growing churches compares to worship in other congregations. Pretty much all congregations include a sermon, singing, and an offering in worship service. That's the given. Fast-growing churches were actually more likely to be having the Lord's Supper during worship on a regular basis than the other churches. That, to me, is a really interesting thing, because some congregations are actually moving away from more frequent Lord's Supper celebrations. Fast-growing churches are more likely to have laughter, applause, participation by teens, and drums and guitar. What is going on in those worship services that's not in the others? People are excited, even with a blanket. Amen! They're having a good time in worship. They're spiritually fed there, and they're excited. And they leave there, and they're more likely to invite other people. So those are some of the things that are going on in fast-growing churches that make them fast-growing churches. Visual projection equipment is more common, but it's really not very common in our churches even today. That may come up in the future. But I like it in here. I don't want to come out. What's this obsession with change anywhere? Leave me alone. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the big bad E evangelism work. But it really is very basic. Hospitality in congregations is no different from hospitality anywhere else. If you go to a new restaurant and have a bad experience, or the food is just so-so, you're not going to go tell your friend, hey, you should go check out that new restaurant.
the service wasn't very good and the food wasn't very good either, but you should check it out. That just doesn't happen. So people have to be excited about what's going on in their congregations. There's a restaurant in Louisville where the proprietor is often stationed at the door, and he is the most hospitable person I've ever seen, and I just really enjoy going back to that restaurant. Because he comes up and he doesn't just say, how many at your table, let me seat you, but he holds your hand, looks you in the eye and says, I'm so glad you've come here tonight. We want to make sure you have a really good experience. Now, it doesn't help that he's tall, dark, and handsome. He connects with everybody, whether it's a man or a woman. He has that just natural charm to connect with people. And so your congregations need to be challenged to show hospitality to people who walk in there into the doors for the very first time, so that they know that they can be a part there, that they have a place there, that they can connect with God in your congregation. So let's summarize. What have we learned? First of all, strong congregations welcome people, truly welcome people. Not get upset because they're sitting in their place in the pew. But they welcome them and make sure that they can experience God as you experience God in the pews. Strong congregations offer excellent, meaningful worship experiences. You can issue 1,000 invitations to worship, but if people walk in the door and sit through ho-hum worship, they're not going to come back. So it really has to be excellent every single Sunday. A friend invited me to their church when I first moved to Louisville. Said, well, you're always welcome at thus and such Presbyterian church. Says, but ask me first because our guest preachers aren't very good. Well, that didn't really sell our church to me. Every Sunday, it's got to be top-notch. Every Sunday has to be top-notch. Strong congregations encourage participation, okay? Strong congregations encourage participation of people who are already there, people who are just beginning, young people, older people, everybody. It's congregations that have lots of people involved in lots of ways that are more successful, strong, and growing churches. Strong congregations help people grow spiritually, okay? But it's not to the extent that you're focusing solely on the needs of the people already in your pews. You need to have this variety of strengths, not just growing spiritually, in order to be effective. But people are coming to congregations to feed their souls, to grow in discipleship and faith, and that's something that you need to provide for them. And finally, strong congregations commit to a positive future. It's not the sense that our best days are in the past when we used to be bigger and we used to have more people and more programs, but really we have an agenda, we have a mission, we are doing God's work, and we are going somewhere positive for the future. People who have a positive outlook and are excited about what's going on in their congregations, are going to be excited about that and want to share it with other people. And that's what evangelism and church growth is all about. Thank you. I just wanted to mention one other handout that you did get was this that tells the Presbyterian picture from 2008, 2009. And then I actually am going to give these books away. If you pick up your green handout, 3 of you should have NKP or something like that, PKN, at the bottom corner on the back. And if you have that, you can come up and claim a free book. There's 2 winners over here. Do we have a third? Did the third one not get picked up? Well, I will donate this to the Presbytery, and you all can decide what to do with it. Thank you so much for having me here. It was wonderful to be with you today. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Trying to downplay worship as a primary way of attracting visitors and new people. I just wondered how you would respond to that.
Well, there is something called side door evangelism. A lot of people these days might be somewhat off-put by stepping into worship, particularly if they haven't been attending a congregation for a while. So some people have found it very, very effective to invite people first to other activities of the church. So it might be a book club, or it might be a service activity, or a community fair, so that they begin to connect with people in the congregation. And then as they know people a little bit more through that book club, oh, these are nice people, I'd like to be involved more. Then they might be more interested in coming to worship. But you're right, some people are not ready to come to worship as the very first activity in church. Good point.
Well, kind of along with that, along with that, I mean, you know, I was curious about the definition of growth being what happens in 1 hour on Sunday morning, as opposed to the entire ethos or whatever that is going on in that particular congregation.
Right. I mean, that was one of the reasons that we looked at 10 strengths. We looked at 10 strengths and growth is what we did. I'm focusing mostly on growth here. But congregations can be very effective and not be growing. You can have vibrant programs, excellent service to the community, marvelous worship, and that's a successful congregation as well. But every congregation is going to lose people to death, people who drift away, people who leave. And if you don't replace those people who are drifting away or leaving, then your congregation is going to start declining. So at least there is some evangelism that every congregation needs to have in its mind. Does that answer your question?
Any more questions?
They're starving.
I think I know the answer, but I want to hear your answer. Why is it that we want our churches to grow?
That's a good question. And part of what I just said about some congregations are not growing, and that's fine. But there is, the gospel calls us to share our faith with other people and to grow the church. Not every congregation is going to be a growing church. That's simply the fact, particularly in today's society when religion is becoming less important overall. But just to stay the same size requires some focus on outreach and sharing the word with other people.
One more.
A lot of our churches in this presbytery are in small rural communities. Are you finding the research is any different about growing and non-growing churches, especially in communities that are struggling to maintain their own demographics?
It is more difficult. Certainly when your community is declining and there are fewer people there, it's very hard to be a growing church, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Some churches can do it in tough rural areas where plants have closed down and lots of people have left. I think it's a more difficult thing. Churches tend to be smaller in those areas. They're struggling more. Just to pay the upkeep on a building, let alone pay a pastor's salary, can be very difficult for small churches. So yes, it's certainly a challenge.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing with us.